1,000 miles from anywhere. There was a kind of quiet that shouldn't exist in war. Only the slow sway of a whaler called the Susan and Abigail, drifting under a white sun. Its sails hung limp in still air. The crew, mostly Nantucket men with weathered faces and calloused hands, were gutting the last of a sperm whale when a cry cut through the silence. The lookout pointed east, a speck on the horizon, growing larger. Within the hour, it became a silhouette, long, low, and sleek, black hull, angled bow, gun ports closed, just a shark-like presence moving with grim intent. The Susan and Abigail had no cannons, so when the black vessel fired a blank shot across their bow, panic spread. Men scrambled across the deck. One dropped to his knees in prayer. The vessel drew broadside. At last, it hoisted a flag. The naval jack of the Confederate States of America, a flag the world thought was gone. Ropes were thrown, grappling hooks caught the rails. Boots thudded on the wood. They came aboard with Southern accents and pistols. Officers in worn gray uniforms, smelling of gunpowder and sea rot. At their head was a thin man with a ginger beard and sunken eyes beneath a stovepipe hat. "James Waddell," he said, "Commander, CSS Shenandoah." The Yankee captain stammered, "The war is over. Lee surrendered in April." Waddell didn't blink. "We haven't heard that. Until we do, we sail under orders." He opened a ledger. "Your ship is hereby seized for commerce with the enemy." It was absurd. The Confederacy was ashes. Jefferson Davis was a prisoner, but in Waddell's mind, and by extension, the black ghost ship he captained, the war continued. The Susan and Abigail's whaling logs were confiscated and burned. Her crew was forced into lifeboats. Her cargo of whale oil was dumped. Then the Confederates shelled the vessel until she split and sank. It was the 31st American ship the Shenandoah had destroyed, and it would not be the last. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the whaler's crew floated helplessly, watching the Shenandoah vanish into mist. A Confederate flag rippled over open water. The final chapter of the Civil War was only beginning. The hull was still unpainted when the agents arrived. In the foggy shipyards of the River Clyde, a slender steam-powered frigate stood half complete. The workers called it Hull Number 290, but the men financing it had other names in mind. This was the birth of a predator, a ship that would strike without warning across the globe, built in secret for the battered, cornered Confederacy. The Union blockade was strangling the South. Cotton could not leave. Weapons could not enter. The Confederates had no navy left to break the barrier, at least not in America. But in Britain, quiet allies of the South still moved behind the scenes. Commander James Waddell wasn't there for the launch. He would not see the ship for months, but he had already been chosen, a quiet, steady-handed Virginian, loyal to the Southern cause. His orders, signed by Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, were clear. Take command of the cruiser once it departs British waters. Sail under false colors if needed. Destroy Union commerce across the globe. Do not return home until the mission is complete, and under no circumstances surrender the vessel to the enemy. October 19, 1864, Madeira Islands. The ship sailed under the name Sea King, a British identity. Its true nature was hidden in crates of naval guns and Confederate uniforms stored below deck. But 3 days into the Atlantic, the disguise ended. On a calm stretch of sea near Madeira, Waddell came aboard by tender. On deck, he read the sealed orders aloud. Some crewmen were unwilling. They had not signed up for piracy or war. 18 men lowered boats and rowed into the horizon. The rest stayed, sailors from Liverpool, Ireland, Australia, and the Carolinas. They changed out of merchant clothes and into gray. The Confederate flag was raised. The Sea King was no more. She was now the CSS Shenandoah, the last great commerce raider of a dying republic. For months she moved like a shadow, avoiding ports, slipping through blockades, using foreign waters to resupply. The crew trained with rifles and cutlasses. They loaded shells into Dahlgren cannons. They learned how to erase Union shipping from the map. One whaler, one merchantman, one clipper at a time. The Confederacy hoped that a ship like this, hunting far from home, might tip the war, or at least prolong it. But even as the Shenandoah prowled, the Confederacy was collapsing faster than anyone on board could know. Their mission was clear, but their world was vanishing. By the time the Shenandoah crossed into Arctic waters, the Civil War was already over. But on board, no one knew for sure. They had left Melbourne months earlier, the only friendly port that dared to take them in, and sailed north through the Pacific like a ghost ship. No news, only scattered rumors from intercepted ships. Lee had surrendered, Richmond had fallen, Jefferson Davis was captured. But Waddell did not believe it. If we surrender now, and it is false, he told his officers, we hang as pirates. So they pressed on, northward, past the Aleutian chain, into waters heavy with fog, drifting ice, and Union whalers rich with oil. It was a hunting ground. In a single week, the Shenandoah captured or destroyed 11 American whalers, all flying Union colors, all sailing under the false belief that peace had returned. The crew boarded each vessel with the same cold ritual: logs confiscated, crew transferred to lifeboats or taken prisoner, cargo dumped, ships burned, blown up, or sunk. One whaling captain, when told the war was still on, stared in disbelief. That cannot be, he said. Lincoln is dead. The fighting is over. Waddell gave no answer. He only lit a match and dropped it into the ship's cargo hold. In the bitter Arctic winds, the contradiction deepened. Ice clung to the rigging. Half the crew developed frostbite. Prisoners now outnumbered sailors. Food ran low. The ship's surgeon caught pneumonia and died. Still, Waddell pressed forward. He even drafted new orders, plans to extend their campaign across the Arctic and down the Atlantic coast of the Americas. If they could reach New York, they might spark fear again. A reminder that the Confederacy's sting had not died. But then, on June 27th, they captured a final whaler. Among the passengers was a British merchant. In his hands, a stack of recent San Francisco newspapers. The headlines were unambiguous. Lee surrenders at Appomattox. Davis captured in Georgia. President Lincoln assassinated. The Shenandoah's officers gathered in stunned silence. There was no room left for doubt. The Confederacy was gone, and they, armed, in uniform, and still at sea, were now pirates. The decision was made quietly. Commander Waddell gathered his senior officers in the chart room. His hands trembled as he unfolded the latest dispatches. Newspapers from San Francisco, real, verified, cross-checked. The war was over. One officer slammed his fist on the table. We were carrying out orders. Waddell met his eyes. Whose? There was no one left to give them. If they returned to any Union port, they would be tried as pirates, not prisoners of war. No court would accept "we didn't know" as a defense. Their raiding had continued after the surrender. They had done all that marauding after the surrender at Appomattox. Even foreign ports had turned. Britain wanted to wash its hands of the South. France had abandoned all pretense of support. Australia was too far. Mexico was unstable. No port on earth would give safe harbor to a Confederate warship in the autumn of 1865. Waddell retreated to his quarters. He stared at the Confederate flag folded on his bunk and drafted his final orders. Lower the Confederate naval jack, disarm all visible weaponry, stow the uniforms, paint the hull, sail as a merchantman, and plot a course for Liverpool, England, the only place where political sympathy and deniability might still exist. He changed nothing about his own uniform. For 3 months, the Shenandoah sailed without setting foot on land. 17,000 nautical miles. They dodged shipping lanes, avoided merchants, crossed the equator, survived typhoons. Men grew frail. Morale decayed. One sailor wrote, "We are like phantoms on a haunted ship carrying the ghost of a country no one believes in anymore." But Waddell never flinched. He remained on deck. By the time they approached the Irish Sea, every man knew the truth. It could end in prison. It could end on the gallows. But they could not drift forever. On November the 6th, 1865, the Shenandoah entered the River Mersey. She passed merchantmen and tugboats, none aware of who she was. At dock, Commander James Waddell stepped ashore in full Confederate uniform and walked into the Liverpool Customs Office. There, he handed over the ship and surrendered the last fighting force of the Confederacy to Queen Victoria's government. At the Liverpool docks, a strange tension gripped the city. Crowds gathered, staring at the Shenandoah. Some recognized her outline from sketches in the Times. Others remembered when Confederate agents had prowled this port, quietly stirring sympathy for their cause. But the war was over. Britain had backed the wrong side in spirit, and now it wanted to move on. The appearance of the Shenandoah was an embarrassment, a diplomatic time bomb. The crew was confined on board. The United States demanded extradition. They called the Shenandoah a pirate ship. Every raid after April 9th, especially those in the Arctic, was now, by international law, a crime. But Britain hesitated. To hand over Confederate sailors would be to admit complicity. Complicity in construction, in arming, in harboring. And Britain had already been sued once for that. The infamous Alabama claims, a case brought by the United States accusing Britain of covertly supporting Confederate raiders. London wanted no more trouble, so after weeks of quiet negotiation, the British released the crew and the Shenandoah was turned over to the United States. James Waddell quietly faded into civilian life. Later, he captained a United States mail steamer. His Confederate past politely ignored. He never expressed regret, only pride in his discipline. Many of his officers scattered across the globe. A few fled to South America. Some returned to the United States under false names. The Shenandoah was sold to a Liverpool man, then to the first Sultan of Zanzibar, who renamed it the El Majidi after himself. She sunk at sea in the Gulf of Aden in 1879. The Shenandoah had sailed 58,000 nautical miles, circled the globe, sunk or captured 38 Union ships, taken more than 1,000 prisoners, and fired the last shot of the American Civil War in the Bering Sea months after Appomattox. Today, the story is half remembered, a footnote in a war that never ended cleanly. But if you stand on the docks of Liverpool at dawn and listen long enough, you might hear the creak of rigging and see a gray phantom vanish into the mist, a warship without a war, sailing for a country that no longer existed.